He was left to die in childbirth, but his business partner secretly became the father of the child. My beautiful family, guess what will happen in the end? Will she forgive him, or will she take revenge? Stay till the very end to witness a story full of love, betrayal, and shocking twists. Hi, my beautiful family. I am Mr. Peter, always here with you in love. Heavenly Father, I thank you for blessing me with this family across the world. Bless every sister, mother, and daughter who listens with a pure heart. May their days be filled with peace, their nights with rest, and their homes with endless love. Lift their burdens, heal their pains, and let them know they are more precious than gold. Amen. My family, every story I write comes from my heart. I pour my soul into every line to bring you love, comfort, and joy. It hurts when some leave in the middle because all my effort is for you. My biggest strength is Binta. She changed me with her love, wisdom, and patience. She keeps me strong and inspires me to never give up on my family. This channel lives because of you. Every like, comment, and view is a treasure. To my new members, trust takes time, but this is your home now. Stay with me until the last line and feel the truth of my heart. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write I am with Mr. Peter. The moment Jack Johnson heard that piano, he knew his life was about to shatter into a million pieces, and he would spend every breath trying to put it back together. Claressa Shields didn't just play music, she summoned lightning with her fingertips. Each note she struck seemed to reach inside Jack's chest and stop time itself. The charity gala's 300 guests had fallen silent, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips, diamonds forgotten around necks, as every soul in the Meridian Hotel ballroom surrendered to the magic flowing from her hands. Jack stood transfixed near the auction table, his 6-foot frame rigid with something he'd never felt before. At 32, he'd built an empire worth $200 million, erected skyscrapers that kissed clouds, and commanded respect from mayors and moguls alike. But watching this woman transform ivory keys into pure emotion made every achievement feel like child's play. "Close your mouth, brother, before you catch flies," Oscar Holyfield whispered beside him, a knowing grin spreading across his dark features. At 28, Oscar served as Jack's business partner and the closest thing to family he'd ever known. "You look like you've been struck by divine intervention." "Who is she?" Jack managed, never taking his eyes off the ethereal figure at the piano. Claressa wore a midnight blue gown that seemed to flow like water around her curves. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant crown of curls, and her skin glowed like burnished gold under the crystal chandeliers. Claressa Shields, 26 years old, classically trained at Juilliard. "But she's got jazz running through her veins like fire," Oscar replied, studying his friend's mesmerized expression. "They say she can make grown men weep with her music. Apparently she's doing more than that to you." As if sensing his gaze, Claressa's eyes found Jack's across the crowded room. For one impossible moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Her fingers never faltered on the keys, but her lips curved into the slightest smile, a secret meant only for him. The spell broke when thunderous applause erupted throughout the ballroom. Claressa rose gracefully from the bench, acknowledging the standing ovation with genuine warmth. Jack found himself clapping harder than anyone, his palms stinging with enthusiasm. "Go talk to her," Oscar urged, straightening Jack's black tie with brotherly affection, "before some other millionaire realizes what we're all witnessing." Jack had faced down corporate sharks and hostile board meetings without breaking a sweat, but approaching Claressa Shields felt like walking toward the edge of the world. His Italian leather shoes clicked against marble as he navigated through clusters of admiring guests, each step bringing him closer to the woman who'd just rewrote his definition of beauty. "That was extraordinary," he said when he finally reached her side, amazed his voice sounded steady. "I'm Jack Johnson. I know exactly who you are," Claressa replied, her voice carrying the same melodic quality as her piano playing. You built the Meridian Tower downtown. I drive past it every morning on my way to the conservatory and wonder what dreams live behind those glass walls. Her words hit him like a physical force. Most people saw his buildings as monuments to wealth and power. She saw dreams. Would you like to find out? The invitation left his lips before his mind could second-guess it. The dreams, I mean. I could show you the city from the top floor. The view is, well, it's almost as breathtaking as your performance tonight. Clarissa studied him with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed businessman facade. Mr. Johnson, are you asking me on a date? I'm asking you to let me spend time in whatever presence turned this room full of strangers into believers. Jack's honesty surprised even himself. Though if that constitutes a date, then yes, absolutely. Her laugh was like music itself, rich, genuine, and completely unguarded. I finish here at 11. Pick me up at 11:30. The next 4 hours crawled by like centuries. Jack attempted conversations with donors and city officials, but every word felt hollow compared to those few minutes with Clarissa. He caught Oscar watching him with amused concern. "You're completely gone, aren't you?" Oscar observed as they stepped outside the hotel into the cool evening air. "I've never seen you like this, Jack. Not even when you landed the Morrison contract." "This is different," Jack admitted, adjusting his cufflinks nervously. "She's different. Did you see the way she played? Like she was channeling something divine. I saw a beautiful, talented woman who clearly affected my normally composed business partner," Oscar chuckled. "Just be yourself, man. Well, maybe be the best version of yourself." At 11:30 sharp, Jack's black Bentley pulled up to the hotel's side entrance. Clarissa emerged wearing a cream-colored coat over her gown, her natural beauty somehow even more striking in the soft streetlight. Jack stepped out to open her door, his heart hammering against his ribs. "So, Mr. Johnson," she said as they glided through the city streets, "tell me about these dreams that live in your buildings." "Call me Jack, and honestly, until tonight, I thought they were just structures. Steel and glass and concrete, designed to impress investors and house businesses." He navigated toward downtown, where his latest creation pierced the skyline like a gleaming spear. "But watching you play, you made me remember why I became an architect in the first place." "Why was that?" "To build something beautiful that would outlast me. To create spaces where people could fall in love, make memories, start families." His voice grew softer as they pulled into the building's private garage. "I'd forgotten that buildings are supposed to shelter dreams, not just generate profit." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt both eternal and impossibly brief. When the doors opened directly into Jack's penthouse office, Clarissa gasped. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city, with lights stretching to the horizon like fallen stars. "My God," she whispered, moving to the windows. "It's like standing inside a constellation." Jack watched her profile as she took in the view, memorizing the curve of her neck, the wonder in her expression. "I've shown this office to dozens of people, investors, architects, journalists. You're the first person to see stars instead of real estate values." She turned to face him, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with electricity. "What do you see when you look out there, Jack?" "Tonight, I see possibility." He stepped closer, drawn by some invisible force. "I see a future I never imagined wanting." Their first kiss happened beside those windows, with the city bearing witness below. It was gentle, tentative, and absolutely perfect. When they finally broke apart, Clarissa's eyes were shining with tears. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, concerned he'd overstepped. "Nothing's wrong," she whispered. "Everything's exactly right, and that terrifies me." They spent the rest of the night talking about music and architecture, dreams and fears, the way moonlight transforms familiar landscapes into something magical. Jack shared his vision for affordable housing projects, while Clarissa described her work with underprivileged children at the community center. As dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, they stood together at the windows, her head resting against his shoulder. "I have something to tell you," Clarissa said quietly, her voice carrying a strange tension that made Jack's stomach clench with sudden unease. But before she could continue, Jack's phone rang with the harsh urgency that meant only one thing: crisis. The caller ID showed Oscar's name, and Jack knew his partner would never interrupt unless it was life or death urgent. What secret was Clarissa about to reveal? And what emergency was about to shatter this perfect moment forever? Chapter 2. Building Dreams. Together, love, Jack discovered, was the only construction project that defied every blueprint he'd ever drawn, and the only one he never wanted to complete. "Jack, thank God you answered." Oscar's voice crackled through the phone with barely contained panic. "The Morrison site. There's been an accident. The crane operator had a heart attack, and the whole structure is unstable. Fire departments evacuating 6 city blocks. We need you here now." The magic of dawn shattered like glass around them. Jack watched Clarissa's face transform from intimate vulnerability to understanding resignation, and something inside his chest twisted painfully. "I have to go," he said, ending the call while his eyes pleaded with her to understand. "Clarissa, what you were about to tell me can wait." She touched his cheek gently, her fingers warm against his skin. "People's lives are in danger. Go be the hero you were born to be." "This isn't how I wanted our first night to end." "Then make sure it's not an ending at all," she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Go save the city, Jack Johnson. I'll be right here when you get back." The next 18 hours became a blur of emergency meetings, structural engineers, and crisis management that would have normally energized Jack's problem-solving instincts. Instead, every minute away from Clarissa felt like torture. Even as he coordinated the controlled demolition that prevented a catastrophic collapse, part of his mind remained in that penthouse office, replaying every moment of their perfect night. By the time the site was secured and the last evacuee had returned home, Jack looked like he'd aged a decade. Oscar found him slumped in his trailer office, still wearing his now wrinkled tuxedo from the gala. "You saved 40,000 people from losing their homes today," Oscar said, settling into the chair across from Jack's makeshift desk. "So why do you look like someone died?" "Because I think I might have lost her." Jack rubbed his exhausted eyes. "She was about to tell me something important, Oscar. Something that made her scared, and then I ran off to handle this crisis like I always do." "Brother, any woman worth having will understand that you just prevented a disaster that would have made national news." Oscar studied his friend's haggard appearance with concern. "Besides, didn't she tell you she'd be waiting?" Before Jack could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. The sender's name made his heart leap. Clarissa. "Turn on Channel 7 News. You're famous, hero, and I'm proud of you." The news coverage was already calling it the miracle of Morrison Avenue, how the quick thinking of architect Jack Johnson and his team had prevented what could have been the deadest building collapse in the city's history. But all Jack could focus on was the brief interview clip where Oscar had mentioned Jack's personal motivation to protect the community he loves. His phone rang immediately. "You're on television." Clarissa's voice was warm with admiration and something else. Something that sounded like wonder. "I'm a mess," Jack admitted, catching his reflection in the trailer's small mirror. "I haven't showered. I haven't slept. And I definitely haven't stopped thinking about you for 1 second. Where are you right now?" "The construction trailer. Still cleaning up this disaster." "What's the address?" Jack rattled off the location, puzzled. "Why?" Because heroes need taking care of, she said simply. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived carrying a thermos of coffee and a bag from his favorite Italian restaurant, somehow having discovered his preferred order without asking. More incredibly, she'd changed into jeans and a soft sweater, making her look approachable and real in a way that made Jack's chest ache with tenderness. How did you know? He asked as she unpacked containers of food that smelled like heaven. I called Oscar. He's surprisingly chatty about your habits. She handed him the coffee, their fingers brushing in a way that sent electricity shooting up his arm. Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. They sat in his cramped trailer office, sharing pasta and stories while the sun set outside. Clarissa listened with genuine interest as Jack explained the engineering challenges they'd faced, asking intelligent questions that proved she was absorbing every detail. You love it, she observed, watching his face animate as he described the complex calculations required to safely bring down the unstable structure. The problem-solving, the life-or-death decisions, the way you can see solutions that others miss. I love building things that matter, Jack corrected. Creating something from nothing, making spaces where people can live and love and dream. He set down his fork, studying her face. What about you? What drives you to create music? The same thing, I think. Music builds bridges between souls. When I play, I'm constructing something invisible but essential, a connection, a moment of shared emotion, a memory that someone will carry forever. Her eyes grew distant. My grandmother used to say that musicians are architects too. We just build with notes instead of steel. The conversation flowed like a river between them, meandering through childhood memories, professional ambitions, and the 1,000 small details that make up a human life. Jack learned that Clarissa donated half her performance fees to music programs in underfunded schools. She discovered that Jack's first successful building had been an elementary school in his old neighborhood, constructed at cost because he remembered what it felt like to attend classes in a crumbling facility. Tell me about your family, Jack said as they finished the last of the wine Clarissa had somehow produced from her seemingly magical bag. A shadow crossed her features, brief but unmistakable. Not much family left. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19. My grandmother raised me, but she passed during my final year at Juilliard. She traced the rim of her wine glass with one finger. Music became my family after that. The composers who left their souls in the notes, the audiences who let me share those souls with them. I'm sorry, Jack said softly, understanding now the source of the loneliness he'd sensed beneath her confident exterior. That's a lot of loss for someone so young. It taught me not to waste time on things that don't matter. She met his eyes directly. And it taught me to recognize real connection when I find it. The weight of her words settled between them like a challenge and a promise. Jack reached across the small table to take her hand, marveling at how perfectly their fingers intertwined. Clarissa, last night you were about to tell me something that scared you. She was quiet for so long that Jack wondered if she'd decided not to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was going to tell you that I've never felt anything like what happened when I saw you across that ballroom. That it terrified me because I've built my entire life around being self-sufficient, around never needing anyone. Her grip on his hand tightened. I was going to tell you that one night with you had already changed something fundamental inside me, and I didn't know if I was brave enough for that kind of vulnerability. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs as he processed her words. And now? Now I think maybe some risks are worth taking. She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise, especially when the alternative is wondering what if for the rest of my life. The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, more certain, charged with the electricity of two people choosing to jump off a cliff together. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Come home with me, Jack whispered against her lips. Not for anything more than what you're ready for. Just don't let this night end yet. They drove through the city in comfortable silence, her hand resting on his thigh as familiar landmarks took on new meaning. Everything looked different when you were falling in love. Colors more vibrant, lights more magical, the future suddenly infinite with possibility. Jack's penthouse apartment occupied the top 2 floors of one of his earlier buildings, a space he'd designed as a sanctuary from the demands of his public life. As they stepped off the private elevator, Clarissa gasped at the open floor plan that seamlessly blended living, kitchen, and workspace areas under a soaring ceiling dotted with skylights. "You live in a piece of art," she breathed, moving to the grand piano that dominated one corner of the main room. "I don't actually play," Jack admitted sheepishly. "I bought it because it looked right in the space, but it's been silent for 5 years." "Not anymore," Clarissa said, settling onto the bench with the familiarity of someone returning home. Her fingers found the keys, and suddenly the apartment was filled with something Jack had never realized it was missing. Music that turned his carefully designed space into a living, breathing sanctuary. She played for an hour, weaving classical pieces with jazz improvisations and melodies she created on the spot. Jack sat transfixed on his leather sofa, watching this woman transform his sterile bachelor pad into something that felt like home. "Play something you've never played for anyone else," he requested when she paused between songs. Clarissa's hands stilled on the keys for a moment. Then she began something hauntingly beautiful, a piece that seemed to tell a story of loss and hope, of walls coming down and hearts opening despite every logical reason to stay protected. "What's it called?" Jack asked, when the last note faded into silence. "It doesn't have a name yet," she admitted, turning to face him. "I started composing it this morning after you left. It's about this, US. The way you make me feel simultaneously terrified and completely safe." Jack crossed the room in 3 quick strides, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her with all the emotion he couldn't yet put into words. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with tears. "Stay," he whispered. "Please, I have 4 guest rooms, or you can have my bed and I'll take the couch. I just want to wake up tomorrow and know this wasn't a dream." She stayed. They spent the early morning hours talking on his terrace, sharing coffee and watching the city wake up below them. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Clarissa curled up in his arms on the living room sofa, her head on his chest, both of them fully clothed, but more intimate than Jack had ever been with anyone. The next 2 months passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing connection. Jack found himself rearranging his schedule around Clarissa's performances, while she began timing her practice sessions to coincide with his lunch breaks so he could listen from his office across town. Oscar watched his friend's transformation with amazement and growing affection for the woman who'd managed to soften Jack's hardest edges. "She's good for you," Oscar observed one afternoon as they reviewed construction plans for their latest project. "I haven't seen you smile this much since." "Well, ever." "She's extraordinary," Jack agreed, unconsciously touching the small velvet box in his desk drawer, a vintage engagement ring he'd purchased just that morning, even though they'd only been together 2 months. "Oscar, I think she's the one." "You think, brother? You bought a ring. I'd say you're past thinking." Oscar grinned at his friend's obvious happiness. "When are you going to ask her?" "Soon. I want to design something special first, a house for us, something that combines everything she loves with everything I know about creating a home." Jack's eyes lit up with inspiration. A music room with perfect acoustics, gardens where she can compose outdoors, spaces that flow together like one of her songs. "You're designing a love letter in architecture," Oscar said with approval. "She's going to cry when she sees it." That evening, Jack surprised Clarissa by picking her up after her rehearsal with the City Symphony. Instead of heading to one of their usual restaurants, he drove to an empty lot on the outskirts of town, 5 acres of rolling hills, with a view of both the city skyline and the distant mountains. "What is this place?" Clarissa asked as they walked across the property hand in hand. "Our future," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "If you want it to be." He pulled out the architectural plans he'd been working on for weeks, detailed blueprints for a house that was equal parts practical and romantic. The main floor featured a music conservatory with floor-to-ceiling windows and a baby grand piano positioned to catch the morning light. The master suite opened onto a private garden designed for outdoor concerts. Every room flowed seamlessly into the next, creating sightlines and acoustic pathways that would carry music throughout the entire home. "Jack," Clarissa whispered, tears streaming down her face as she studied the drawings. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Look at the basement level," he said, pointing to a special room marked only with the letter N. "What's N?" "Nursery," he said quietly. "For the children I hope we'll have someday. I designed it with built-in speakers so you can play lullabies from the music room upstairs." Clarissa dropped the plans and threw her arms around his neck, sobbing against his shoulder with joy so profound it scared them both. When she finally pulled back to look at him, her face was radiant despite the tears. "Are you asking me to marry you, Jack Johnson?" "I'm asking you to build a life with me," he said, producing the vintage ring he'd carried in his pocket for days, waiting for the perfect moment. "To let me love you for the rest of our lives. To fill this house with music and laughter and all the dreams we haven't even dared to dream yet." The ring slid onto her finger like it had been crafted specifically for her hand. Clarissa stared at it in wonder, an elegant emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the setting sun and scattered rainbow light across their joined hands. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to all of it, yes to forever." Their engagement party 3 weeks later became the social event of the season, with Oscar proudly serving as the master of ceremonies and half the city's elite toasting the couple who'd managed to make even cynics believe in fairy tale romance. But as Jack watched Clarissa play their song, the one she'd composed that first night in his apartment, he couldn't shake a growing unease that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the phone calls that had been interrupting their perfect moments more and more frequently. The Morrison project had made Jack famous, but fame was attracting attention from people who didn't wish him well, and as Clarissa's ring caught the light during her performance, neither of them noticed the man in the corner taking photographs with a very expensive camera. Chapter 3. The Promise. Made. On the morning Jack Johnson was to marry the woman of his dreams, he received a phone call that should have been his first warning that some promises are made to be broken. The call came at 6 in the morning, 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Jack's phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand of his hotel suite, where Oscar had insisted he spend the night to maintain tradition. The caller ID displayed a name that made Jack's blood freeze: Vincent Torino, the city's most ruthless development magnate and Jack's biggest professional rival. "Congratulations on your wedding day, Johnson." Torino's gravelly voice carried a false warmth that fooled nobody. "I hope you're prepared to make some difficult choices about what matters most to you." "What do you want, Torino?" Jack kept his voice steady, despite the unease crawling up his spine. "Nothing that can't wait until after your honeymoon. Enjoy your special day with that beautiful musician of yours." The line went dead, leaving Jack staring at the phone with growing dread. Oscar emerged from the bathroom, already impeccable in his charcoal grey groomsman suit, and immediately noticed Jack's troubled expression. "Bad news on your wedding day? That's got to violate some kind of cosmic law," Torino called. "He's planning something, and he wanted me to know about it before I walked down the aisle." Jack set the phone aside and reached for his tuxedo, forcing himself to focus on the day ahead. "Whatever he's scheming, it can wait. Today belongs to Clarissa and me." Damn right it does, Oscar agreed, straightening Jack's bow tie with the careful attention of a brother. You're marrying the most incredible woman in the city, your business is thriving, and you've got a house being built that's going to make architectural magazines weep with envy. Torino can take his threats and shove them. The Cathedral of Saints rose like a Gothic dream against the October sky, its spires reaching toward heaven, as if blessing the union about to take place within its sacred walls. Jack had chosen the venue specifically for its acoustics, knowing that Clarissa would want their wedding to be filled with music that soared as high as their love. As guests began arriving, Jack marveled at how their two worlds had seamlessly merged over the past 6 months. Business associates mingled with symphony musicians, construction workers shared pews with conservatory professors, and everyone seemed genuinely excited to witness this union that had become legend in their social circles. "You look like a man about to inherit the world," Oscar observed as they took their positions at the altar. The cathedral was filled to capacity with white roses and baby's breath creating an ethereal pathway down the center aisle. "I already have," Jack replied, his eyes fixed on the rear doors where Clarissa would soon appear. "Everything else is just details." When the organ began playing the processional, a piece Clarissa had composed specifically for this moment, Jack's breath caught in his throat. She appeared at the cathedral entrance like a vision conjured from pure love. Her wedding gown a masterpiece of silk and lace that seemed to float rather than touch the ground. Her natural hair was styled in elegant waves, crowned with her grandmother's pearl combs, and her radiant smile could have powered the city for a week. She walked alone down the aisle, having insisted she needed no one to give her away since she was choosing freely to give herself to Jack. Every step brought her closer to their future, and Jack felt tears threatening as he watched this extraordinary woman become his wife. "Dearly beloved," the priest began when Clarissa finally reached Jack's side, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them in his. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other their perfect completion." The ceremony flowed like one of Clarissa's compositions, each element building toward the crescendo of their vows. When the moment arrived for them to speak the words they'd written for each other, Jack's voice rang clear and strong throughout the cathedral. "Clarissa, 6 months ago you walked into my life and taught me the difference between building structures and creating homes. You showed me that the most important architecture isn't made of steel and glass, but of trust and tenderness, of shared dreams and whispered promises." He paused, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was about to pledge. "I vow to you before God and these witnesses that you will always be my first priority. If ever I am faced with choosing between professional glory and your happiness, between worldly success and your well-being, I will choose you. Always you. May everything I build turn to dust if I ever place anything above the sanctity of your soul." Gasps echoed through the cathedral at the intensity of his promise. Oscar felt a chill run down his spine, as if they'd all just heard a prophecy rather than wedding vows. Clarissa's response was equally powerful, her voice carrying the same musical quality that had first captured Jack's heart. "Jack, you've taught me that love isn't just about finding someone who completes you, but about becoming someone worthy of completion. You've shown me that true strength comes not from independence, but from choosing to be vulnerable with the right person." Tears streamed freely down her face as she continued. "I promise to fill your life with music, to be your sanctuary when the world becomes too heavy, and to love you with the same passion and dedication you bring to everything you create. Through whatever storms may come, I will be your foundation as you have become mine." When they exchanged rings, his a simple platinum band, hers the vintage emerald engagement ring now joined by a matching wedding band, the entire cathedral seemed to hold its breath. The kiss that sealed their marriage lasted long enough for the congregation to burst into spontaneous applause, and when they finally broke apart, Both were laughing through their tears. The reception was held in the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, the same venue where they'd first met. Oscar's best man speech brought down the house, recounting Jack's transformation from workaholic bachelor to devoted fiancé with humor and genuine affection. "I've watched Jack build monuments to his ambition all over this city," Oscar declared, raising his champagne flute. "But the greatest thing he's ever constructed is the love he shares with Clarissa. May that be the foundation that supports everything else he ever creates." As the evening progressed, Jack and Clarissa moved through their reception like dancers in a perfect pas de deux. They mingled with guests, cut their three-tier cake topped with sugar flowers that matched Clarissa's bouquet, and shared their first dance to the song she'd written for him that magical first night. But even in the midst of such joy, Jack couldn't entirely shake the unease Torino's call had created. He noticed men he didn't recognize lingering at the edges of the celebration, their expensive suits and calculating eyes suggesting they weren't typical wedding guests. "Oscar," Jack whispered during a quiet moment between dances, "do you recognize those two near the bar, the ones taking pictures?" Oscar followed Jack's gaze and frowned. "Never seen them before? Want me to have them removed?" "No, don't make a scene. Just keep an eye on them." Jack forced himself to smile as Clarissa approached, radiant in her happiness. "Tonight is about celebrating. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." But as the evening wound down and he and Clarissa prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Tuscany, Jack found an envelope slipped under the door of their bridal suite. Inside was a single photograph, a candid shot of him and Clarissa during their engagement party 6 months earlier, with a message scrawled on the back in block letters: "Beautiful couples make beautiful targets. Enjoy your honeymoon, Mr. Johnson. Your real marriage begins when you return." Jack stared at the threatening note while Clarissa finished packing in the bedroom, humming the melody from their wedding song. The sound of her happiness only made the cold dread in his stomach worse. "Ready, my husband?" Clarissa appeared in the doorway wearing traveling clothes, her face glowing with post-wedding bliss. Jack quickly pocketed the photograph, forcing his brightest smile. "Ready for anything, my wife." As their car pulled away from the hotel toward the airport, neither Jack nor Clarissa noticed the black sedan that began following them through the city streets. In the passenger seat of that sedan, Vincent Torino studied surveillance photos while his associate drove. "Beautiful wedding," Torino murmured to himself. "Too bad it's going to be such a short marriage." The honeymoon would be perfect, but the real test of Jack's sacred vows was waiting for them back home, and some promises are easier to make in the glow of candlelight than to keep in the harsh fluorescent reality of business warfare. Chapter 4. New Life Stirring. The morning Clarissa Johnson discovered she was carrying their first child, Jack realized that all his architectural achievements had been mere practice for building the most important structure of his life, a family. 3 months had passed since their fairy tale wedding, and the Tuscany honeymoon had given way to the comfortable rhythm of married life. Their dream house was nearing completion on the hillside property, with construction crews working overtime to finish before the spring season. Jack arrived home each evening to find Clarissa at the piano, composing new pieces inspired by their shared happiness. But this particular December morning felt different. Jack woke to find his wife's side of the bed empty, unusual for someone who typically treasured their quiet morning moments together. He found her in the marble bathroom of their temporary downtown penthouse, staring at a small white stick with an expression he could not immediately interpret. "Clarissa?" He approached cautiously, noting the way her hands trembled slightly. "Everything all right?" She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her smile radiated pure joy. "Jack, we're going to have a baby." The pregnancy test clattered to the marble floor as Jack swept her into his arms, spinning her around the bathroom while both of them laughed and cried simultaneously. When he finally set her down, his hands immediately moved to her still flat stomach, with reverent wonder. "How long have you suspected?" he asked, pressing gentle kisses to her forehead. "2 weeks, maybe 3. I wanted to be certain before telling you." Her voice carried the musical quality he adored, now enhanced with maternal tenderness. "I have a doctor's appointment scheduled for this afternoon to confirm everything is progressing normally." Jack's mind immediately shifted into planning mode. The same strategic thinking that had built his architectural empire now focused on creating the perfect environment for their growing family. "We need to accelerate construction on the house. The nursery room I designed will need modifications for proper ventilation and temperature control, and we should interview pediatricians, research the best hospitals, ensure every detail is perfect." "Jack," Clarissa laughed, placing her hands over his to still their nervous movement, "we have 7 months to prepare. The baby will be fine if we take this one step at a time." But Jack had never approached anything important with casual preparation. By the time they arrived at Dr. Helena Martinez's office that afternoon, he had compiled a comprehensive list of questions about prenatal care, nutritional requirements, and environmental factors that might impact fetal development. Dr. Martinez, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner, reviewed Clarissa's medical history while Jack sat rigidly in the chair beside the examination table, his notebook ready to record every instruction. "Based on your last menstrual period, Mrs. Johnson, you're approximately 8 weeks pregnant," Dr. Martinez announced, after completing the initial examination. "Everything appears perfectly normal and healthy. Your due date should be around mid-August." The ultrasound image that appeared on the monitor moments later rendered both parents speechless. Their child appeared as a tiny, flickering heartbeat, surrounded by the protective sanctuary of Clarissa's womb, already loved beyond measure despite being smaller than a grape. "That's our baby," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gripped Clarissa's hand. "Strong heartbeat, good positioning, textbook development for this stage," Dr. Martinez confirmed with professional satisfaction. "I'll want to see you monthly for the first trimester, then more frequently as we approach delivery." The drive home passed in contemplative silence, both of them processing the magnitude of the news. Jack found himself driving more cautiously than usual, already protective of the precious cargo his wife now carried. "I need to call Oscar," Jack said as they entered their penthouse. "He should know he's going to be an uncle." "Uncle Oscar?" Clarissa mused, settling onto the sofa with her hands resting on her stomach. "He's going to spoil this child terribly." Oscar's reaction exceeded their expectations. He arrived at their door within 30 minutes of Jack's call, carrying flowers for Clarissa and a bottle of champagne. He immediately realized they could not share in her condition. "A baby," he repeated for the 5th time, pacing their living room with barely contained excitement. "Jack Johnson is going to be a father. This child is going to have the most spoiled upbringing in the history of parenthood." "The child will have a loving upbringing," Clarissa corrected gently. "Material things matter less than emotional security and genuine affection." "Both," Jack interjected, already sketching modifications to the nursery plans on a napkin. "Our child will have everything love can provide and everything success can afford." The following months transformed into the happiest period of their marriage. Jack threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to major construction projects. He read every book on child development, attended prenatal classes with religious devotion, and spent evenings talking to Clarissa's growing belly as if the baby could already understand his promises of devotion. The nursery became his masterpiece within a masterpiece. He personally supervised every aspect of its construction, from the hand-carved rocking chair positioned to catch the morning light to the sound system that would carry Clarissa's lullabies throughout the house. The walls were painted in soft yellows and greens, gender-neutral colors that would welcome their child, regardless of whether they were having a son or daughter. "You're building a palace for someone who won't even notice their surroundings for the first several months," Clarissa observed one afternoon in April, watching Jack install the 3rd safety feature on the nursery windows. "I'm building a foundation for a lifetime of security," he replied, testing the window locks with methodical precision. Every detail matters when you're creating an environment for someone you love more than life itself. Claressa's pregnancy progressed beautifully through the spring months. Her morning sickness subsided by the second trimester, replaced by the radiant glow that made her even more beautiful in Jack's eyes. She continued performing with the symphony until her 6th month, when her expanding belly made piano performance uncomfortable. Instead, she focused on composing, creating a collection of pieces inspired by impending motherhood. The melodies she crafted during those months carried themes of anticipation, wonder, and profound love, each note reflecting her emotional journey toward becoming a parent. "Play the one you wrote last week," Jack requested one evening in May, as they sat in their completed living room, the construction finally finished and their dream house ready for occupancy. Claressa moved to the grand piano, her movements more careful now that she carried their child. The piece she began was haunting and beautiful, a musical representation of a lullaby that spoke of protection, promise, and unconditional love. "What will you call it?" Jack asked, when the last note faded into the evening air. "Promise to tomorrow," she replied, her hands resting on her rounded stomach. "It's what we're both doing, isn't it? Making promises to someone we haven't met yet, but love completely." Their social circle rallied around the expectant couple with enthusiasm that bordered on the overwhelming. Baby showers, dinner parties celebrating their impending parenthood, and constant offers of advice from friends who had already navigated the journey into family life filled their calendar. Oscar appointed himself official guardian of Claressa's well-being during Jack's business trips, which had become more frequent as several major projects demanded his attention simultaneously. The Morrison Avenue development had attracted national recognition, leading to offers from developers in other cities who wanted Jack Johnson's signature style gracing their skylines. "You're becoming famous," Oscar observed during one of their weekly business meetings in June. "These contracts could establish our firm as a national presence rather than just a local success." "The timing couldn't be better," Jack agreed, reviewing proposals that would require extensive travel over the next year. "By the time the baby arrives, we'll have secured enough major contracts to provide complete financial security for the next generation." But Claressa had begun expressing concerns about Jack's increasing absences. Their conversations during his business trips grew shorter, interrupted by calls from contractors, meetings with investors, and the constant demands of managing multiple projects across several states. "I miss you," she told him during a video call while he was in Dallas reviewing plans for a luxury hotel complex. "The baby's been kicking all day as if asking where Daddy went." "Just 2 more days," Jack promised, though his attention was divided between her and the documents spread across his hotel room desk. "This contract alone will fund the baby's entire college education and secure our family's future for decades." After ending the call, Jack sat alone in his hotel room, surrounded by the blueprints and financial projections that represented his professional dreams coming true. Everything was falling into place exactly as he had envisioned: national recognition, financial security, a beautiful wife, and a child on the way. So why did he feel an inexplicable sense of unease, as if he stood on the edge of a precipice he could not yet see? The answer came 3 days later, when Vincent Torino's call interrupted his return flight from Dallas. "Congratulations on your expanding empire, Johnson." Torino's voice carried the same false warmth that had marked their previous conversations. "I hope fatherhood doesn't make you too attached to your current success. Sometimes men have to choose between protecting their families and protecting their businesses. I wonder which one you'll choose when the time comes." Chapter 5. Cracks in the Foundation. The first crack in Jack Johnson's perfect life appeared on a Tuesday morning in July, disguised as an opportunity that would make him rich beyond imagination, and cost him everything that truly mattered. Claressa was 32 weeks pregnant when the call came. Jack stood in their completed nursery, testing the mobile he had commissioned from a local artisan, watching tiny architectural models of famous buildings spin gently above the crib where their child would soon sleep. The morning light streamed through windows he had positioned to catch the sunrise, illuminating the space he had designed with more love than any cathedral. "Mr. Johnson, this is Margaret Chen from Sterling Development Corporation in New York." The voice on his phone carried the crisp authority of serious money. "We have a proposition that could change your entire career trajectory." Jack stepped out of the nursery, instinctively moving away from the sanctity of their future child's space before discussing business. "I'm listening." "We want to offer you the lead architect position on the Phoenix project, a $2 billion development that will reshape Manhattan's skyline. 40-story twin towers, mixed-use development, the kind of project that gets featured on magazine covers and establishes architectural legacies. The numbers hit Jack like physical blows. $2 billion, Manhattan, legacy. Everything he had worked toward his entire career offered on a silver platter. "The timeline is aggressive," Margaret continued, her voice betraying no emotion. "Groundbreaking in October, which means we need preliminary designs approved by September 1st. It would require your complete attention for the next 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Jack's mind immediately calculated the implications. "My wife is due to give birth in early August. The timing is impossible." "Mr. Johnson, opportunities like this appear once in a lifetime. We've researched your work extensively. The Morrison Avenue project, your innovative use of sustainable materials, your ability to blend functionality with aesthetic vision. You're exactly what this project needs." Margaret's tone sharpened with business calculation. "However, if the timing doesn't work for your personal schedule, we have other architects under consideration." Jack found himself walking to the master bedroom, where Clarissa napped peacefully, one hand resting on her swollen belly. 7 months of pregnancy had made her even more beautiful, her face glowing with maternal serenity, her body gracefully accommodating the life they had created together. "I need to discuss this with my wife," he said quietly. "Of course. But understand that this decision needs to be made quickly. We're interviewing final candidates this week." After ending the call, Jack sat beside the bed, watching Clarissa sleep. Their child moved visibly beneath her thin cotton dress, small limbs stretching and shifting as if already eager to enter the world. This was everything he had claimed to want: family, love, the quiet satisfaction of domestic happiness. So why did the Phoenix project feel like destiny calling? When Clarissa woke an hour later, Jack explained the opportunity with careful neutrality, presenting the facts without revealing his growing excitement about the prospect of designing something that would outlast them all. $2 billion, Clarissa repeated softly, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "That's an incredible amount of money. More than we could earn in 10 years of local projects," Jack confirmed, "but the timing couldn't be worse. I would need to be in New York constantly through September, possibly longer." "Through our baby's birth," Clarissa said, her musical voice carrying a note of sadness he had never heard before. "I told them no, obviously. Family comes first. That's what I promised you." But even as he spoke the words, Jack felt them ring hollow. The Phoenix project represented everything he had sacrificed his 20s to achieve. National recognition, architectural immortality, the kind of success that would secure their family's future for generations. "What does Oscar think?" Clarissa asked, struggling to sit up against the pillows he quickly arranged behind her. "I haven't told him yet." There's no point discussing something that's not going to happen. That afternoon, Jack met Oscar for lunch at their usual restaurant, intending to mention the Phoenix project only as an interesting footnote to their conversation. Instead, he found himself describing every detail of the proposed development with barely contained enthusiasm. "Jesus, Jack," Oscar breathed, setting down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "This is it." This is what we've been building toward our entire careers. It doesn't matter, Jack said quickly. Claressa's due date is too close. I can't abandon my wife to chase a business opportunity. But what if you didn't have to choose? Oscar leaned forward, his eyes bright with possibility. What if we structured this so you could be present for the birth but still secure the contract? How? I handle the day-to-day operations here. You do the initial New York meetings, establish the creative vision, then work remotely as much as possible. If Claressa goes into early labor, you drop everything and come home. If she delivers on schedule, you're back for the birth and can resume work afterward. Jack wanted to dismiss the suggestion immediately, but found himself considering the logistics. The contract would require physical presence for key meetings. Some meetings. Not all meetings. Jack, this is the opportunity we've dreamed about since we started this company. Oscar's voice carried a conviction that resonated deep in Jack's ambitious heart. And think about what this means for your child. Financial security beyond imagination. A legacy worth inheriting. The conversation haunted Jack through the rest of the week. He researched the Phoenix project obsessively, studying architectural renderings and financial projections that made his current success seem small by comparison. The towers would rise higher than any building he had ever designed, incorporating innovations that would influence urban development for decades. Meanwhile, Claressa grew noticeably more uncomfortable as her pregnancy entered its final weeks. July's heat seemed to affect her more severely, leaving her exhausted and occasionally dizzy. Jack arranged for a cleaning service and meal delivery, ensuring she could rest as much as possible, but his attention was increasingly divided between her needs and the opportunity that beckoned from New York. "You're distracted," she observed one evening as they sat on their terrace, watching sunset paint the city in shades of gold and rose. "You've been checking your phone every few minutes." "Just keeping up with current projects," Jack lied, though his phone contained saved articles about the Phoenix project and unanswered emails from Margaret Chen. "Jack, if this opportunity means so much to you, maybe we should reconsider." The words he had been hoping to hear struck him like lightning. "You would be okay with me traveling during your final month?" "I would be okay with you pursuing your dreams as long as you promise to be here when it matters most." Claressa took his hand, pressing it against her belly where their child seemed to respond to his touch with gentle movement. "This baby won't be born for another 4 weeks. If you can balance the travel with being present for the delivery, maybe we can make this work." Jack kissed her deeply, tasting salt from tears he had not realized were falling down his cheeks. "I promise you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will not miss our child's birth. Whatever this project demands, that day belongs to our family." The call to Margaret Chen felt like stepping through a doorway into a different version of his life. Within 48 hours, Jack was on a plane to New York, his laptop loaded with preliminary sketches and his heart heavy with the weight of the promise he had just made. The Sterling development offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower that offered panoramic views of Manhattan's iconic skyline. Margaret Chen proved to be a woman in her 40s with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing, surrounded by a team of executives who spoke in the language of quarterly projections and market penetration. "Mr. Johnson, your reputation precedes you," she said, gesturing toward a conference table covered with site plans and financial documents. "We are prepared to offer you a contract worth $12 million for the Phoenix project's architectural design, with performance bonuses that could double that amount. $12 million. Jack had never imagined earning such a sum from a single project. The figure represented financial freedom beyond his wildest calculations, enough to ensure that his child would never want for anything. "The timeline remains non-negotiable," Margaret continued. "We need your complete commitment through the initial design phase. Any delays could cost us the development permits we've secured." Jack found himself nodding agreement before his conscious mind had processed the implications. I understand. My wife is due in early August, but I can work around that timeline. Excellent. We'll need you in New York 3 days per week through August, with the understanding that September will require your full presence here. As Jack signed the contract that would change everything, his phone buzzed with a text message from Clarissa. Baby's moving so much today. I think he or she is as excited about Daddy's new adventure as we are. Love you. The irony was not lost on him that he was signing away his availability during his child's first month of life at the exact moment Clarissa was expressing support for his dreams. But $12 million would provide security for generations, and surely a successful father was better than a present but struggling one. The flight home gave Jack 6 hours to rationalize his decision, to transform what felt like betrayal into what sounded like wisdom. He was building a legacy, securing his family's future, ensuring that his child would inherit a world of infinite possibilities. When he arrived home to find Clarissa pale and exhausted, her ankles swollen and her breathing labored, a different kind of fear began to take root in his chest. "How did the meetings go?" she asked, struggling to rise from the sofa where she had been resting. "Perfectly. The contract is signed, and I structured everything to be here when you need me most." He helped her to her feet, alarmed by how much effort the simple movement required. "Are you feeling all right? You look tired." "Just the normal discomforts of late pregnancy," she assured him, though her smile seemed forced. "Dr. Martinez says everything is progressing normally." But as Jack held his wife that night, listening to her restless breathing and feeling the constant movement of their overactive child, he wondered if normal was enough, and whether the promise he had made to always choose family over ambition would prove stronger than the golden handcuffs he had just locked around his wrists. The first warning sign came 2 days later, when Clarissa collapsed during a routine grocery trip and Jack was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, unreachable and committed to meetings that could not be rescheduled. Chapter 6. The Ultimate Betrayal. At 3:17 a.m. on August 2nd, while Jack Johnson was choosing between a conference call worth millions and his wife's desperate pleas for help, he discovered that some promises shatter the moment you need them most. The call came to Jack's hotel room in Manhattan, just as he was reviewing final presentations for the Phoenix Project's morning meeting with Sterling Development's board of directors. Clarissa's name appeared on his phone screen, and the sound of her labored breathing immediately sent ice through his veins. "Jack, something's wrong," she gasped, her voice tight with pain and fear. "I'm bleeding, and the contractions started an hour ago. They're coming every 3 minutes. Jack shot upright in the hotel bed, his laptop tumbling to the floor as adrenaline flooded his system. "Where are you? Are you at the hospital?" "I'm still at home. I called Dr. Martinez, but she's in surgery. The service said to wait for her call back, but Jack, I'm scared. This doesn't feel right." Clarissa's voice broke on a sob that tore straight through his chest. "The baby's not moving like before. And there's so much blood." "Call 911 right now," Jack ordered, already reaching for his clothes with his free hand. "Don't wait for the doctor. Get to the hospital immediately." "Jack, please," she whispered, and he had never heard her sound so small, so vulnerable. "I need you here. Something's happening, and I can't do this alone." Jack's eyes fell on the presentation materials scattered across his hotel room, $12 million worth of contracts that required his signature in 6 hours. The Phoenix Project team had flown in from 3 different cities for this morning's final approval meeting. Margaret Chen had made it clear that any delays could collapse the entire deal. "I'm getting on the next flight," he promised, his fingers already working his phone to pull up airline schedules. "The earliest I can be there is 8 hours, but I'm coming." 8 hours? The desperation in Clarissa's voice made him want to punch through the hotel room wall. "Jack, I don't think I have 8 hours. Dr. Martinez's service just called back. They want me at the hospital now. They're talking about emergency procedures. Emergency procedures. The words hit Jack like physical blows. He closed his eyes, seeing Clarissa alone and terrified, needing him more than she had ever needed anyone, while he stood in a Manhattan hotel room surrounded by the trappings of his professional ambitions. "Clarissa, listen to me," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the panic clawing at his throat. "Call Oscar. He'll drive you to the hospital and stay with you until I get there. You're not alone, I promise." The silence that followed lasted forever. "You're not coming now," she said finally, her voice flat with a devastation that would haunt his dreams for years to come. "You're not dropping everything and getting on the next plane. You're choosing that meeting over our baby." "It's not that simple," Jack began, but the words sounded like ash in his mouth. "If I walk away from this contract now, we lose everything. $12 million, Clarissa. Our child's entire future. Our child's future is being born tonight, and their father is choosing money over being here for it." The line went quiet, except for her labored breathing. "I have to go. The contractions are getting worse. Clarissa, wait." But she had already hung up, leaving Jack alone with the silence of his hotel room and the weight of the choice he had just made. For 20 minutes, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone and the airline website still open on his laptop. The next flight to his city departed at 6 a.m. He could make it if he left for the airport immediately, but the Phoenix Project meeting began at 9 a.m. with executives who had restructured their schedules around his availability. Margaret Chen's words echoed in his memory. "Opportunities like this appear once in a lifetime." At 3:47 a.m., Jack Johnson made the decision that would destroy everything he claimed to love most. He closed the airline website, returned to his presentation materials, and began practicing the speech that would secure his professional future while his wife faced the most terrifying night of her life alone. The call came at 6:23 a.m., just as Jack was adjusting his tie for the most important meeting of his career. Oscar's name appeared on the phone screen, and Jack's hands shook as he answered. "Jack, where the hell are you?" Oscar's voice carried a fury that Jack had never heard before. "Clarissa's in emergency surgery. The baby's in distress, she's hemorrhaging, and she's been asking for you for 3 hours." "Surgery?" Jack's knees buckled, forcing him to sit down hard in the hotel room chair. "Oscar, what's happening? Is she going to be okay?" "I don't know," Oscar shouted, his composure completely shattered. "The doctors won't tell me anything because I'm not family." "She needs her husband here, Jack. Not in 6 hours. Not after your meeting. Now." Through the phone, Jack could hear the chaos of a hospital emergency room, urgent voices, machines beeping, the controlled panic of medical professionals fighting to save lives. "I'm getting on the next flight," Jack said. But even as the words left his mouth, he remained seated in the hotel chair, surrounded by presentation boards that represented his architectural legacy. The next flight. Oscar's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more impact than his shouting. "Jack, your wife is fighting for her life, and your child might not survive the next hour. And you're talking about the next flight." The line went dead, leaving Jack alone with the morning sunlight streaming through Manhattan windows and the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. At 9 a.m. exactly, Jack Johnson walked into Sterling Development's boardroom, his presentation materials organized, his appearance impeccable, and his phone silenced to avoid interruptions. For the next 3 hours, he delivered the performance of his professional lifetime, securing contracts worth $12 million, while his wife underwent emergency surgery to save their child's life. The Phoenix Project was officially his by noon. Margaret Chen shook his hand with genuine admiration, praising his vision and commitment to excellence. The other executives spoke of architectural legacy and generational wealth, painting pictures of the fame and fortune that awaited him. Jack accepted their congratulations with appropriate humility, scheduled follow-up meetings for the coming weeks, and maintained his professional composure until the conference room door closed behind him. Only then did he turn on his phone and discover 17 missed calls from Oscar. The messages that followed painted a picture of devastation that made Jack's professional triumph taste like ashes. Clarissa had nearly died on the operating table. The baby had been born healthy but premature, requiring immediate medical intervention. Oscar had been the only person present to make crucial medical decisions while Jack signed contracts in a Manhattan boardroom. Jack's hands trembled as he listened to the final voicemail, left at 11:47 a.m. while he had been shaking hands with Sterling Development executives. "Jack, your son is beautiful and perfect, and he'll never know that his father chose money over being here for his first breath. Clarissa is stable but unconscious. I've been here for 12 hours while you've been playing businessman. When you finally decide to show up, don't expect forgiveness. Some betrayals are unforgivable, and abandoning your family during a life-threatening emergency is one of them." The flight home became Jack's personal purgatory. 6 hours of turbulence and guilt as he replayed every decision that had led him to choose ambition over love. The Phoenix Project contract sat in his briefcase like evidence of his crime, $12 million of blood money earned while his wife fought for her life. But when Jack finally reached the hospital that evening, he discovered that Oscar's fury had been only the beginning of his punishment, and that some betrayals create consequences that can never be undone. Chapter 7. When Heroes Rise. Oscar Holyfield had always believed that heroism was reserved for soldiers and firefighters, until the night he held a newborn baby whose father had chosen ambition over love, and realized that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply showing up when no one else will. The emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital had become Oscar's personal hell, a fluorescent-lit purgatory where he paced between uncomfortable chairs, while the woman he had come to love like a sister fought for her life behind surgical doors he could not breach. Clarissa's call had come at 3:30 a.m., her voice thick with pain and terror. "Oscar, I can't reach Jack. Something's wrong with the baby and I'm bleeding. I need someone to drive me to the hospital." He had broken every traffic law racing to their house, finding Clarissa doubled over in the foyer, her nightgown stained with blood, her face pale with shock. The ride to the hospital became a nightmare of contractions and desperate prayers, with Clarissa gripping his hand until his bones ached. "Where is Jack?" she kept asking between waves of pain. "Why won't he answer his phone?" Oscar had no answer that wouldn't destroy what remained of her faith in the man she had married. "Sir, are you family?" The nurse asked the question for the third time in 2 hours, her scrubs stained with evidence of the medical crisis unfolding beyond his reach. "I'm the closest thing she has right now," Oscar replied, his voice hoarse from pleading with medical staff bound by privacy laws and protocol. "Her husband is traveling for business." The lie tasted like poison on his tongue. Business. As if Jack were stuck in traffic rather than sitting in a Manhattan boardroom choosing contracts over his wife's life. Dr. Martinez emerged from surgery at 7:15 a.m., her surgical mask pulled down to reveal exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Oscar rose from his chair like a man preparing for execution, reading his fate in the doctor's expression. "The baby is alive," she said without preamble, and Oscar's knees nearly buckled with relief. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, healthy lungs, strong heartbeat, a perfect little boy. And Clarissa, she hemorrhaged severely during delivery. We had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to save her life. Dr. Martinez paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's stable now, but the trauma was extensive. We've induced a medical coma to help her body recover from the surgery." Oscar stared at the doctor, processing information that felt too massive for his mind to contain. "She's going to be okay?" "We believe so, but it will take time. She'll need extensive support during recovery." Dr. Martinez studied Oscar's face with clinical assessment. Where is her husband? This baby needs immediate care and bonding. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Oscar found himself unable to form words, his loyalty to Jack warring with the rage that had been building in his chest for hours. He's on his way, Oscar finally managed, though the lie felt like betrayal to the unconscious woman who had trusted Jack with her life and been abandoned. The baby needs immediate attention. Skin-to-skin contact, feeding, emotional connection. Dr. Martinez's voice carried gentle insistence. If you're willing to serve as temporary caregiver until the father arrives. Oscar didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely. The neonatal unit became Oscar's world for the next 8 hours. He held Jack and Claressa's son, a perfect child with his mother's delicate features and his father's strong jaw, learning to change diapers, prepare formula, and recognize the subtle differences between hungry cries and tired fussiness. What's his name? The day nurse asked, as Oscar fed the baby his afternoon bottle. I don't know, Oscar admitted, studying the perfect face that looked up at him with complete trust. His parents hadn't decided yet. And where is his father? The question he had been dreading all day finally came, spoken with the knowing tone of a medical professional who had seen too many abandoned families. Oscar looked down at the innocent child in his arms, this perfect miracle who deserved better than a father who would always choose ambition over love. His father isn't coming, Oscar said quietly, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. The nurse studied his face with sharp attention. Mr. Holyfield, are there circumstances we need to know about regarding this child's welfare? Oscar felt something shift inside his chest as he watched Jack's son sleep peacefully, unaware that his father had valued a contract signing more than his first breath. In that moment, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the quiet beeping of medical machines, Oscar Holyfield made the most important decision of his life. I think this child needs protection, he said quietly, and I think his mother deserves better than waiting for someone who will never truly come home. The social worker who arrived that evening was a tired woman named Patricia Stone, who had spent 20 years navigating family crises with professional detachment. But even she seemed moved by the story Oscar carefully constructed, a tale of an abusive husband who had threatened both mother and child, of a father whose neglect made him unfit for parenthood. You're saying the biological father abandoned his wife during a medical emergency? Patricia consulted her notes with practiced efficiency. He's been unreachable for over 18 hours, while his wife nearly died in surgery, Oscar replied, the truth making his fabricated story more convincing. When she was calling for him in labor, he was attending business meetings in New York. And you've been the child's primary caregiver since birth? I was present for the delivery, made all medical decisions, and have been the only consistent parental figure in the baby's life. Oscar adjusted the sleeping infant in his arms, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. I'm requesting emergency guardianship to protect him from further neglect. The paperwork took 2 hours to complete. Oscar signed documents establishing temporary custody, created a birth certificate listing himself as the father, and provided testimony about Jack's unfitness as a parent. Each signature felt like both betrayal and salvation, destroying Jack's legal claim while protecting an innocent child from future abandonment. This is highly irregular, Patricia admitted as she witnessed the final documents. But given the circumstances of parental abandonment during a medical crisis, the court will likely approve emergency guardianship. When Jack finally called at 6 a.m. the next morning, Oscar was ready. Oscar, thank God! Jack's voice carried relief and panic in equal measure. How are they? Is Claressa awake? Is the baby okay? Your son is perfect, Oscar said coldly, adjusting the infant against his chest. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, healthy and beautiful, no thanks to his father. And Claressa? In a coma. She nearly died, Jack. They removed her uterus to stop the hemorrhaging. Your wife almost bled to death calling your name while you were signing contracts. The silence that followed stretched across the miles between Manhattan and the hospital room where Oscar cradled the child Jack should have been holding. "I'm flying home now," Jack said finally. "I'll be there by this afternoon." "Don't bother rushing," Oscar replied, watching the baby's peaceful face as he slept. "You've already missed everything that mattered." Oscar ended the call and looked down at the child who had become his responsibility through abandonment and love. He had forged documents, lied to social workers, and manipulated a legal system designed to protect children from unfit parents. But watching this perfect innocent sleep trustingly in his arms, Oscar felt no guilt, only the fierce protectiveness of someone who had found his true purpose. "Your daddy chose money over being here for your birth," he whispered to the sleeping baby. "But I promise you'll never wonder if you're loved. I promise you'll never be abandoned again." Outside the hospital room windows, the sun was setting on August 2nd, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. It was a beautiful evening for new beginnings, for the birth of love that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with showing up when it mattered most. When Jack Johnson finally arrived at the hospital 6 hours later, he would discover that some betrayals create consequences that reshape entire families, and that the man he had once called his closest friend had just become his greatest enemy. Chapter 8. Years of Hidden Truth. 7 years after the night that shattered 3 lives forever, a 60-second video of a boy playing piano would prove that some secrets are too powerful to remain buried, and some bonds too strong to be broken by lies. Claressa Williams, she had reclaimed her maiden name the day her divorce was finalized, stood in the kitchen of her modest townhouse preparing lunch for her husband of 3 years. The wedding ring on her finger bore no resemblance to the vintage emerald that had once symbolized promises broken in Manhattan boardrooms. This simple gold band represented something entirely different: love built on presence rather than promises, devotion demonstrated through daily choices rather than grand gestures. Dr. Michael Williams had been her therapist first, helping her navigate the devastating aftermath of abandonment and loss. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully, with the patience of 2 people who understood that real love required foundation building rather than fairy tale romance. He had been there through the darkest months of her recovery, when the reality of Jack's betrayal had seemed too massive to survive. "The session notes from yesterday," Michael said, entering the kitchen with the focused attention that made him excellent at his profession. "Mrs. Rodriguez is making remarkable progress with her anxiety management. I believe we can reduce her sessions to monthly check-ins." Claressa smiled, watching her husband review patient files with the same meticulous care he brought to everything in their life together. At 45, Michael possessed the quiet strength that comes from helping others heal their deepest wounds. His presence had taught her that love could be both passionate and peaceful, that security came not from grand romantic gestures, but from consistent daily kindness. "Any difficult cases today?" she asked, setting his coffee beside his papers. "A custody battle involving parental abandonment. The mother is struggling with trust issues after being left during a medical emergency." Michael glanced up from his notes, his expression carrying professional concern. "It reminds me how fortunate we are to have found each other." The words carried additional weight for Claressa, who had learned that happiness was not a destination, but a daily choice made by 2 people committed to showing up for each other. Her marriage to Michael bore no resemblance to the passionate whirlwind she had shared with Jack. Instead, it offered something more valuable: absolute reliability and genuine partnership. Her music career had evolved during the recovery years. Instead of performing in concert halls, she now taught piano lessons to children at the community center, finding joy in nurturing young talent rather than seeking applause from strangers. The compositions she wrote during this period reflected hard-won wisdom about love, loss, and the courage required to rebuild a life from ashes. "The Henderson boy shows real promise," she told Michael, referring to her most talented student. "His technique reminds me of someone I used to know." The comment carried layers of meaning that Michael understood without explanation. Clarissa rarely spoke directly about her first marriage or the child she had lost, but 7 years of therapy had taught both of them that healing happened through gradual acknowledgement rather than forced confrontation. Meanwhile, across the city, Oscar Holyfield was experiencing his own version of domestic contentment as he helped his 7-year-old son with homework at their kitchen table. The boy, legally named David Holyfield, according to the forged documents Oscar had filed years earlier, possessed the same intense focus that had once characterized his biological father's approach to architectural problems. "Dad, why do buildings need so many support beams?" David asked, looking up from his science textbook with curious brown eyes that carried unsettling resemblance to someone Oscar tried not to remember. "Because every structure needs a strong foundation," Oscar replied, the words carrying personal significance he hoped the child would never need to understand. "Without proper support, even the most beautiful buildings will collapse." Oscar's devotion to David had become the organizing principle of his life. He had restructured his business partnerships to allow maximum time for school events, homework assistance, and the 1,000 daily interactions that comprise real fatherhood. The architectural firm he had built without Jack's partnership had achieved modest success, but Oscar measured accomplishment differently now, in parent-teacher conferences attended, bedtime stories read, and piano lessons that David approached with inherited musical talent. "Can we practice piano after homework?" David asked, his face lighting up with the enthusiasm that appeared whenever music entered the conversation. "Of course. Show me what you learned in your lesson yesterday." The piano in their living room had been Oscar's gift to David on his 5th birthday, a baby grand that the child approached with natural ability that sometimes made Oscar's chest ache with complicated emotions. Watching David play, Oscar often wondered if musical talent was purely genetic or if some deeper connection existed between the boy and the mother he believed had died during childbirth. The lie had become Oscar's greatest burden and most necessary protection. David knew only that his mother had been a beautiful musician who had loved him completely, but died bringing him into the world. Oscar had constructed this fiction to spare the child from knowledge that would have destroyed his sense of security, that his biological father had chosen money over family, abandoning them during their most vulnerable moment. Across town, in a penthouse office overlooking the city skyline, Jack Johnson stared out at buildings that no longer brought him satisfaction. The Phoenix Project had indeed established his national reputation, leading to contracts in 12 major cities and a personal fortune that exceeded his wildest early ambitions. Architectural magazines featured his innovations regularly, and industry awards lined the walls of his sterile corporate headquarters. But success had proven to be a hollow achievement when experienced in complete isolation. The man who had once promised Clarissa that she would always be his first priority now lived alone, surrounded by the monuments to his professional accomplishments and haunted by memories of what he had sacrificed to build them. His marriage had legally ended within 6 months of that devastating August night, but the emotional devastation had extended far longer. Clarissa had refused to see him during her recovery, communicating only through lawyers who delivered divorce papers and restraining orders that prohibited him from attempting contact. The child he had briefly glimpsed in the hospital had vanished entirely, spirited away by Oscar through legal maneuvers that Jack's own attorneys had been unable to penetrate. "Sir, the Seattle project requires your approval," his assistant announced through the intercom, interrupting his contemplation of a skyline that contained several buildings he had designed but no longer remembered creating. Jack returned his attention to blueprints and construction schedules, the mechanical routines that filled his days with purpose but not meaning. He had built his empire exactly as planned, creating architectural legacy that would outlast his lifetime. The cost had been everything else that mattered. The video that would change everything appeared on social media on a Tuesday evening in November, uploaded by a proud piano teacher who wanted to showcase her students' remarkable talent. The 60-second clip showed a 7-year-old boy seated at a baby grand piano, his small hands moving across the keys with confidence that seemed impossible for someone so young. The melody he played was hauntingly familiar, a piece Clarissa had composed during their engagement, a song she had titled "Building Dreams Together" and performed for Jack on countless private evenings when their future had seemed limitless. Within 24 hours, the video had been shared thousands of times, gathering comments from viewers amazed by the child's natural ability. But 3 people who saw the clip experienced reactions that had nothing to do with musical talent and everything to do with recognition that struck like lightning. Clarissa discovered it first, forwarded by a colleague who thought she might find the performance inspiring. The moment she heard the opening notes of her own composition, her coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor as 7 years of carefully constructed healing collapsed in an instant. Jack saw it 12 hours later, sent by a business associate who knew his appreciation for classical music. The child's face filled his laptop screen, revealing features that combined Clarissa's delicate bone structure with his own strong jawline. But it was the music that destroyed him. The song his ex-wife had written during their happiest days, now being performed by the son he had lost through his own devastating choices. Oscar was the last to learn about the viral video, alerted by David's excited announcement that his piano performance was famous on the internet. As Oscar watched his son's face appear on thousands of screens worldwide, he realized that 7 years of protective lies were about to crumble under the weight of truth that could no longer be contained. The boy who had been raised as David Holyfield was about to discover that his entire life had been built on fabrication designed to protect him from knowledge that would now destroy the only security he had ever known. Within 48 hours, 3 lives would collide again, as the viral video attracted attention from someone who had been searching for them all, and whose arrival would force Oscar to choose between protecting his lies and protecting the child he loved more than life itself. Chapter 9. Reckoning and Redemption. The truth has a way of surfacing like water through concrete, slowly at first, then all at once, destroying everything built on false foundations until only honest ground remains. Private investigator Rebecca Martinez had been searching for David Holyfield for 18 months, hired by a client whose identity remained sealed behind attorney-client privilege. The viral piano video had been her breakthrough, facial recognition software confirming what human intuition had suspected. The 7-year-old boy performing Clarissa Williams' composition was the missing piece of a puzzle that stretched back nearly 8 years. "I found him," she announced during her Tuesday morning call to the law firm of Sterling, Chen and Associates. "The child from the Johnson custody case. He's been living under the name David Holyfield with Oscar Holyfield in the Riverside district." The response came swiftly. Within 48 hours, court documents were filed challenging the fraudulent adoption, DNA testing was ordered, and the carefully constructed lies that had protected David's childhood began crumbling under legal scrutiny that could not be avoided or deflected. Oscar received the court summons on Thursday morning, delivered by a process server who apologized for interrupting his breakfast with David. The legal language was dense, but the implications were clear. Someone was challenging his parental rights, demanding genetic testing, and threatening to expose the fabricated documents that had made him David's legal father. "Dad, who was that man?" David asked, looking up from his cereal with the casual curiosity of childhood. "Just someone delivering papers for work," Oscar replied. but his hands shook as he folded the summons and tried to maintain the normal morning routine that was about to become impossible. The call to his attorney confirmed his worst fears. "Oscar, this is serious. If they can prove the adoption documents were forged, you could face criminal charges for kidnapping, fraud, and falsifying government records. We need to discuss your options immediately." Oscar's options had narrowed to a single choice: fight the legal challenge and risk prison, or surrender the child he loved more than life itself to a system that would return David to the biological father who had abandoned him at birth. Meanwhile, Clarissa discovered the legal proceedings through a phone call from a social worker assigned to David's case. The woman's voice carried professional sympathy as she explained that DNA testing had confirmed the child's biological parentage and that Clarissa's parental rights, which had never been legally terminated, remained intact. "Mrs. Williams, your son has been living with Mr. Holyfield for 7 years under fraudulent circumstances. The court needs to determine the child's best interests, which may include reunification with his biological mother." Clarissa gripped the phone with hands that had not trembled since her darkest recovery days. Her son, the baby she had believed died during birth, had been alive all this time, raised by the man who had been present when his father chose ambition over family. "I want to see him," she whispered, the words carrying 7 years of suppressed maternal longing. The meeting was arranged for the following Monday at the family court building, with social workers present to facilitate what promised to be the most complicated reunion in the facility's history. Clarissa sat in the sterile waiting room, her hands folded to conceal their trembling, trying to prepare mentally for seeing the child she had mourned for 7 years. David entered the room holding Oscar's hand, his brown eyes wide with confusion about why he had been brought to a building full of serious adults asking questions he did not understand. When he saw Clarissa, recognition flickered across his features, not memory, but some deeper genetic familiarity that made him step closer to Oscar for protection. "David, this is Mrs. Williams," the social worker said gently. "She's someone very important who wants to meet you." Clarissa studied her son's face, seeing Jack's strong jaw combined with her own delicate features, recognizing the musical talent that had made his video famous. But more than genetics, she saw the confidence and security that spoke of Oscar's devoted parenting during the years she had believed her child was dead. "You're the lady who wrote the song I Play on Piano," David said with the directness of childhood, his voice carrying no awareness of the emotional devastation his existence had caused. "Yes," Clarissa managed, her voice thick with tears she refused to let fall in front of her son. "I wrote that song a long time ago for someone I loved very much." The conversation that followed lasted 30 minutes, carefully supervised and deliberately superficial, designed to begin the process of relationship building that would determine David's future. But Clarissa knew within 5 minutes that her son belonged with Oscar, the man who had sacrificed everything to give David the stability his biological parents had failed to provide. Jack learned about the legal proceedings through a call from Margaret Chen, whose law firm had been monitoring custody cases involving prominent clients for potential publicity risks. "Jack, there's a situation you need to know about," Margaret said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering devastating news to a powerful client. "Your biological son has been located. He's been living with your former business partner under fraudulent adoption papers." The words hit Jack like physical blows. His son, the child whose birth he had missed for a business meeting, had been alive all this time, raised by the friend he had lost through his own terrible choices. "Where is he? How do I get custody?" Jack asked, his mind immediately shifting into the strategic thinking that had built his empire. "It's complicated. The child has been with Oscar Holyfield for 7 years. Any custody battle would require proving that Holyfield's care was inadequate, which seems unlikely given the circumstances of your original abandonment. Jack ended the call and stood in his penthouse office, staring out at the city skyline that contained monuments to his success, but offered no comfort for his failures. Everything he had built, the Phoenix Project, the national recognition, the architectural legacy, felt meaningless in the face of the son he had never known. The revelation triggered a cascade of consequences that Jack could not have anticipated. Investigative journalists, attracted by the viral video and subsequent legal proceedings, began examining his business practices with the scrutiny that comes from sensing a larger story. What they discovered was a pattern of corner-cutting, bribery and code violations that had been hidden behind layers of corporate structure and political connections. The Phoenix Project itself became the focus of a federal investigation when whistleblowers revealed that Jack's designs had knowingly violated safety regulations to reduce construction costs. The $2 billion development that had cost him his marriage was now threatening to destroy his professional reputation and result in criminal charges. Within 2 weeks, Jack Johnson's empire was crumbling faster than the inadequately supported buildings he had designed. Contracts were cancelled, assets were frozen, and the architectural legacy he had sacrificed everything to create was being exposed as a foundation built on corruption and fraud. The man who had once promised Clarissa that everything he built would turn to dust if he ever chose glory over her soul was watching that prophecy fulfill itself with devastating precision. The custody hearing was scheduled for December 15th. But Jack knew that legal proceedings would not restore what he had destroyed through his own choices. Standing in his empty penthouse, most of his possessions had been seized as part of the federal investigation. He realized that redemption could not be earned through courtrooms or legal maneuvering. On December 14th, the evening before the custody hearing that would determine his son's future, Jack Johnson drove to the modest neighborhood where Oscar had raised the child he had abandoned. The house was smaller than Jack's former walk-in closet, but warm light spilled from every window, and he could see David practicing piano in the living room while Oscar helped with homework at the kitchen table. Jack sat in his car for an hour, watching the domestic scene that should have been his life, understanding finally what he had traded for professional success that now lay in ruins around him. When Oscar put David to bed and turned off the living room lights, Jack finally found the courage to approach the door. He knocked softly, knowing that this conversation would either begin his journey toward forgiveness or confirm that some betrayals are too profound to overcome. When Oscar opened the door, his face showed no surprise. Only the weary resignation of someone who had been expecting this confrontation for 7 years. "I know you hate me," Jack began, his voice carrying none of the confidence that had once commanded boardrooms and construction sites. "I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I did to Clarissa, to you, to my son. But I need you to know that losing my family was the worst mistake I ever made, and watching you raise David with the love I should have given him has been my punishment and my education." He paused, seeing his own reflection in Oscar's eyes. A broken man who had finally learned that some foundations, once cracked, can never be repaired. "I'm not here to take him from you," Jack continued, the words coming from the deepest part of his heart. "I'm here to ask if there's any way I might earn the chance to be part of his life, not as the father who abandoned him, but as someone who has learned what love actually means by watching you demonstrate it every day for 7 years. Jack's voice broke on the final words, 7 years of suppressed grief and recognition pouring out in a confession that laid bare every mistake, every regret, every moment of understanding what he had lost through his own devastating choices. Chapter 10. Love's True Foundation. True family is not built with DNA or legal documents, but with presence during 2 a.m. fevers, patience through piano practice, and love that chooses to stay when staying is harder than leaving. The custody courtroom fell silent as Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the case files that had consumed 6 months of legal proceedings and 7 years of hidden truth. David sat between Oscar and Clarissa, his small hand gripping the only father he had ever known, while stealing curious glances at the woman who had written his favorite piano pieces. Jack sat alone at the plaintiff's table, his once commanding presence diminished by the weight of choices that had cost him everything he had claimed to value most. "This case presents unique circumstances," Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 20 years navigating family law's most complex challenges. "We have a child who was fraudulently adopted but genuinely loved, biological parents who lost custody through abandonment and deception, and a man who committed crimes in service of protecting a child who was not legally his responsibility. The 6 months since David's discovery had transformed all their lives in ways that legal documents could never capture. Oscar faced criminal charges that had been reduced to probation and community service, the prosecutor acknowledging that his actions, while illegal, had been motivated by child welfare rather than personal gain. Jack's architectural empire had collapsed completely under federal investigation, resulting in prison sentences for fraud and safety violations that would keep him incarcerated for the next 3 years. But the most profound transformation had occurred in the relationship between Clarissa and the son she had never expected to see again. Their weekly supervised visits had evolved into something neither had anticipated. Not the immediate maternal bond that fairy tales promised, but a careful friendship built on music, shared creativity, and David's genuine curiosity about the woman who had written the songs that made him feel understood. "Mrs. Williams," Judge Morrison addressed Clarissa directly, "you have the legal right to petition for full custody of your biological son. The court recognizes that you were deceived about his death and have been denied 7 years of motherhood through fraudulent actions." Clarissa rose from her seat, her voice steady with the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving devastation and choosing to rebuild with honesty rather than bitterness. "Your Honor, I have learned that being a mother is not about biology or legal rights, but about making choices that serve a child's best interests rather than your own desires." She glanced at David, whose brown eyes watched her with the trust that had developed through months of patient relationship building. "My son has been raised by a man who sacrificed everything to give him security, love, and stability. Oscar Holyfield is David's father in every way that matters, and I would be honored to be part of their family rather than disrupting it." The courtroom stirred with surprised murmurs as Clarissa continued, "I petition the court to grant Mr. Holyfield full legal custody while establishing my visitation rights as someone who loves David and wants to remain part of his life." Judge Morrison turned to David, her voice softening as she addressed the child, whose future hung in the balance of adult decisions he had no power to control. "David, you're 7 years old, which means the court considers your preferences in this matter. Who would you like to live with?" David looked at Oscar with the absolute trust that comes from 7 years of bedtime stories, scraped knee bandages, and patient homework assistance. "I want to live with my dad," he said simply, his child's voice cutting through legal complexity with startling clarity. "But I like Mrs. Clarissa too. She teaches me new songs and tells me stories about music." "And Mr. Johnson?" Judge Morrison asked gently, nodding toward Jack. "He's your biological father. Would you like to know him?" David studied Jack with the frank assessment of childhood, seeing a stranger who shared his facial features but carried sadness that seemed too heavy for someone his size to understand. "Is he the reason my dad looks sad sometimes?" David asked with devastating innocence. Oscar's sharp intake of breath was audible in the silent courtroom. 7 years of protecting David from painful truths had not prevented the child from sensing the complicated emotions that surrounded his existence. "Yes," Oscar said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer conceal. "Mr. Johnson made some choices that hurt people we love, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. Sometimes good people make terrible mistakes." Judge Morrison spent 30 minutes reviewing the psychological evaluations, social worker reports, and character witnesses that painted a clear picture of David's well-being and future needs. When she finally rendered her decision, her voice carried the weight of Solomon-like wisdom applied to modern family complexity. The court awards full legal custody to Oscar Holyfield, with the understanding that all parties will work together to support David's emotional well-being and family connections. Mrs. Williams will have liberal visitation rights as David's biological mother and chosen family member. Mr. Johnson will be permitted supervised visits upon his release from prison, contingent on completing parental education and anger management programs. The gavel's final bang seemed to echo with the finality of justice served and wisdom applied, but the real resolution occurred in the courthouse hallway, where three adults faced the work of rebuilding relationships that had been shattered by betrayal and secrecy. "Thank you," Jack said to Clarissa, his voice carrying humility that had been forged in the fire of losing everything he had once believed mattered. "Thank you for choosing David's happiness over revenge against me." Clarissa studied the man who had once promised her forever and delivered abandonment instead. Time and healing had transformed her rage into something closer to pity, allowing her to see Jack's devastation without needing to deepen it. "I learned that hatred hurts the person carrying it more than the person who deserves it," she replied. "David deserves better than adults who use him to settle old scores." Jack turned to Oscar, the friend whose betrayal had actually been the most profound act of love in David's young life. "I will never be able to thank you for what you did," Jack said, his voice breaking with 7 years of suppressed gratitude and regret. "You gave my son everything I was too selfish to provide. You were the father I should have been." Oscar looked at the man who had once been his closest friend and business partner, seeing not the ambitious architect who had chosen contracts over family, but a broken human being who had finally learned the true cost of his choices. "Jack, being David's father has been the greatest privilege of my life," Oscar replied. "I didn't save him. He saved me. He taught me what love actually means. The 3 years that followed brought healing that none of them had thought possible." David continued thriving under Oscar's devoted care while developing genuine affection for Clarissa, who became his music teacher, mentor, and chosen family member. Their weekly piano lessons became cherished time for both of them, filled with compositions that reflected their growing bond and shared creative spirit. Jack's letters from prison arrived monthly, carefully supervised communications that gradually evolved from desperate apologies to genuine interest in David's well-being and achievements. When he was finally released, his supervised visits with David were awkward at first, but grew into something approaching friendship between a man trying to earn forgiveness and a child generous enough to offer it. The final letter in this story arrived on David's 10th birthday, hand-delivered by Jack during one of his monthly supervised visits. Inside the envelope was a deed to a small plot of land, where Jack had once planned to build their family home, now legally transferred to David's name as a trust fund for his future. The accompanying note was brief. "David, I will never be the father you deserved, but Oscar has shown me what that looks like. This land was supposed to be our family's foundation. I hope someday you might build something beautiful on it, something created with love instead of ambition. Your biological father, who loves you and is proud of the man you're becoming. Jack." On that same birthday, as David played a new composition he had written called Family Song for the assembled crowd of people who loved him, Oscar realized that the greatest architecture is not constructed with steel and glass, but with patience and presence, bedtime stories and piano lessons, and love that chooses to stay when staying is the hardest thing to do. Clarissa, watching her son perform with confidence that spoke of security and love, understood finally that motherhood was not about the moments she had missed, but about the future she could help create. Her marriage to Michael had taught her that love could be rebuilt on stronger foundations, and her relationship with David proved that family bonds could be chosen as well as inherited. And Jack, sitting in the back of the room during his supervised visit, watching his son perform for an audience that included the mother he had abandoned and the man who had raised their child with devotion he had never been able to match, finally understood what he had destroyed and why he could never get it back. But understanding brought its own form of peace. Some mistakes cannot be undone, but they can be transformed into wisdom. Some families cannot be rebuilt, but new ones can be chosen. Some love cannot be recovered, but forgiveness can create space for different kinds of connection. David finished his song to enthusiastic applause from the family he had never questioned and the extended family he was learning to accept. When Oscar lifted him up for the traditional birthday hug, David whispered something that only his father could hear. "Dad, thank you for being here for everything." And in that moment, surrounded by love that had been tested by betrayal but proven stronger than deception, Oscar Holyfield knew that he had built the most important structure of his life, not with blueprints and steel, but with bedtime stories and piano lessons, and love that had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier.